I think Viadux is different in that just the challenges that we've got with the site really and where it is.
So the Viadux now is obviously a Grade 2 listed building.
We started the Viadux journey between Domis and Salisbury in January 2020.
A lot of engineering challenges in terms of how we kind of integrate those arches into the scheme and bring those arches back to life.
The ground floor is just completely different and I think it's quite exceptional.
Amazing sort of blank canvas inside to form your amenity space.
It's quite unique in the way that we've had to come out on the ground. Essentially it's not an open site, it's already a site that's got a building on it.
Thought how we're going to build this, how we're going to design it, how we're going to cost it.
I think that's it. The number of challenges, it meant that we needed a lot of unique solutions.
There has been some issues with the piling.
Processes we thought we could use, we couldn't use.
Logistically, the job has been a nightmare from start to finish.
So that's difficult, and the logistics is an ongoing difficult parameters.
How do we build a 40-storey tower without a basement to spread the load, going through a live service yard? So it was like every single challenge you can possibly think of.
I think what this will do is this will unlock a lot of areas that people didn't think viable to build on as being viable.
It was potentially an important site.
Probably the last site in Manchester that close to that Castlefield settlement that they were going to excavate.
It's unique really, because it hasn't really been done much in this country.
We knew there was going to be some stuff there, but we didn't realise exactly how much.
I think that's it, and I think we joked that it's had everything but a well, and I think on phase 2 within the SI they found a historic well, so we're like, oh, that's it now.
A couple of findings which did take longer than we thought to kind of clear. They find things, you've got to respect that.
Again, for Manchester, the type of archaeology we're finding, you don't find that kind of thing.
It's absolutely mega, this site. It's huge. All the sort of steel and temporary works that's going in on the slab. It's really amazing to be a part of it, to be honest. The amount of engineering that's gone into it.
Yeah, Viadux is not the kind of thing we've really seen before.
When the scheme's finished, it's just going to be mind-blowing. It's going to blow everyone away. That's an absolute fact.
The arches are very typical of Manchester's kind of Victorian infrastructure, and to have a new building literally coming out of those arches I think is really kind of unique to Manchester, and it tells the story of the city really well.
That's pretty much Viadux in a nutshell, and it's absolutely spectacular and it will be completely iconic for Manchester.
So yeah, I'm Rob McLaughlin and I'm the project director for the Viadux schemes 1 and 2.
No stress.
So my role entails the operational delivery of both schemes, phase 1 and phase 2, including the commercial design, procurement of an element of procurement, but it's mainly the delivery of the scheme. So that involves running all the site teams, looking after some of the QSs, the design team, external and internal. So external design teams are architects, structural engineers, archaeology. Internal, we've got our own site management teams, our own procurement teams. And yeah, generally my role is to deliver the scheme on budget and on time.
So I'm Paul Hawkins, I'm the pre-construction manager for Domis Construction. So that means I look after everything technical, design, planning, programming, third parties, and effectively trying to get everything ready so we have a seamless handover to the operational guys like Rob on Viadux. So we started the Viadux journey between Domis and Salisbury in January 2020. We were doing discussions with another developer on the site. We got involved, signed some agreements, and then we all sat and scratched our heads and thought how we're going to build this, how we're going to design it, how we're going to cost it, how we're going to deal with all the third parties like Manchester Central, the city, Transport for Greater Manchester. So we set off on that journey January 2020. By about March, April 2020, we were in a position where we had some principle sort of set, what the scheme was going to be, 375 apartments, how tall it was going to be, roughly speaking how we're going to do the foundations for phase 1, when we're going to be able to do site investigations and the design timeline. So we needed best part of a year to get to a stage where we could go from the stage 2 planning design to a design that we could actually start piling on site. The Viadux itself is sort of 2 phases. You've got phase 1, which is a 375 apartment scheme, which is 40 stories, which effectively comes out of these listed arches, which are just incredible. When you go inside and with all the vaulted ceilings and everything else, they've been there as part of the station since somewhere like 1860, 1870. So you've just got this amazing sort of blank canvas inside to form your amenity space and swimming pools. And
high-end restaurant in there, we've got an amazing reception area.
And all the back of house areas. And then you've got this situation where you've got that historic listed arch that you're going to make absolutely incredible. Come out of that listed arch and then you've got to build this 40-storey building on top of it for 375 apartments for phase 1. In the middle of that, you've got like a landscape terraced area, which is going to be where the residents can go. They can sit outside, especially as it's as hot as it has been over the last few days.
Again, that goes through the arches, very similar to phase 1.
As well. So that's pretty much Viadux in a nutshell, and it's absolutely spectacular and it will be completely iconic for Manchester.
I mentioned before, it really is unique for the fact that you don't normally have a 40-storey tower block that the foundations are under some listed arches. So what we had to do is obviously we had to do the archaeology works, which was really in depth, which Graham Motson's going to go into more detail this afternoon. Then we do the foundation. So it's a huge foundation, nearly 273 piles, going 15 metres into the ground. This is all under the arches. We then excavate about 6,000 tonnes of earth, replace that with reinforcement bar and concrete. Again, this is all under the confines of the arches, so it's really tight, really difficult, really hard to work. It's not like a normal open field where you can bring wagons in, so it's a slower process and it's a more costly process. We get the foundation in and then we put the mega columns in. They're called bifurcating columns. There's 12 columns and one huge core. These all have to penetrate through the arches. So with it being grade 2 listed, you need a listed building consent from the city, from the planners, and that's very difficult and a difficult process to get because of the listed. It takes many months. So we got that process signed off last summer and we started doing the penetrations last June, yeah. And that was a pivotal point because all of a sudden you're breaking through the arches and it hasn't really been done before. So you can see, from the service yard of Man Central, you can see down into the arches, which is amazing. And it was kind of, everyone was like, it blew everyone away at first. We got used to it, because we've done 12 of those. And then the pivotal point of phase 1 is getting to the transfer deck when again it becomes a normal job. So that means that all the columns are through the arches.
Could you explain what a transfer deck is?
Yeah, so the transfer deck is kind of the foundation. When you do a kind of a normal scheme, your foundation, what you start from. You have a nice foundation, ground floor foundation, and you'll build from there. Like I said before, a normal foundation on a scheme would take 3 or 4 months. This has taken 18, 19 months, and we've just 2 weeks ago poured the final bit of the transfer deck. That it signifies, it's a big moment really. That's probably the biggest moment in the scheme so far, and we worked really hard. Everyone, all the design team, all the engineers, all the guys at Domis have worked really hard to get to that point. And it's kind of like, okay, it comes a little bit easier now, but then we start phase 2. The apartment block is ongoing now, so we're out the ground, so we call that out the ground, is that the transfer slab is now poured. We've now started with the slip form, so the slip form's a big core that you'll see going up in the sky really quickly. That's up to level 5. And then we've got the slabs, the floors being built, and they'll go on an 8-day cycle now, so every 8 days they'll go another floor, which, it's a really fast process now. It's a process that we've done on all our schemes before in Manchester, and we know that we can be really programme specific. We know that they'll take that certain amount of time. It's good, we can really plan that. And then on the back of that, we start putting the unitised glazing, so that's just the big glazing panels. They start to go on the building the end, mid-August actually. So that process was long. It's taken us 12 months to kind of just point phase 1. But the amenity space is going to be mind-blowing. It's going to be like out of this world. We're really, it's going to be the best in Manchester.
So phase 1 involves a 40-storey residential tower comprising 379 apartments, utilising the arches beneath for amenity spaces, including swimming pool, residence lounge. There'll be a giant fish tank in the lobby area, so it's going to be quite high spec. So in phase 1, we're doing it in terms of the concrete frame and then underneath the arches separately. So we've got an amenities programme which is currently up to just repointing all the brickwork, cleaning it all up, and with the M&E imminently starting.
So my name's Jamie Hoskinson and I'm the director owner of Kinlan Brickwork. Yeah, so we've been raking out and repointing all the heritage work underneath the viaducts. It's all in using a hotline mortar. It's been an iconic build for us. What we've been doing is raking all the joints out, then using a hot pressure wash called a doff clean, and that cleans all the brick out, brings it back to its original finish. And we've been using a hotline mortar to fill the joints. Hotline mortar, it's quite dangerous to use, not something that a normal bricklayer would be used to. They normally use cement mortar. With a hotline mortar, you've got to be careful. You've got to use your goggles, you've got to use your PPE. We also use an eye wash just in case you get it in your eye, and we can make sure that we've got equipment there to get it out of your eye. Thankfully, all our men are trained, and we've had no incidents using it. What we do is we use a mixer to mix the hotline mortar, and then we'll use a bricklayer's hawk, and the bricklayers will point the joints up, fill it with the hotline mortar. Lime mortar takes a while to go off, extremely long time to be fair. But what's different with using cement-based mortar is cement will go off quickly. You won't have to treat it, you won't have to care for it. So with a hotline mortar, you've got to look after it. You've got to care for it. So once we fill the joints, it's prone to cracking. So what you've got to do is you've got to just use a gentle wash on it, just to keep water, keep it moist, and then we actually beat it with a brush. That's the technique. And it can take 2 days of doing this for it to reach its state what it is now.
Running concurrently with that is the concrete frame that's going up. So we've got the core slip form up to level 5, and we're starting to bring up the floors now. So we're getting ready to start putting all the formwork in to start creating the 3rd floor. Okay, so up in that slip form rig, it's basically creating the core of the building, which is the staircase, 4 lift shafts, and it's also including 3 shear walls that are opposite the core. So that encapsulates that whole solid structure. We're aiming to try and slide about 2.5 meters a day. It's planned to actually stop 3 times to allow floors to catch up. Now the reason being is we get to a certain height and the floors have to follow up. We've got to tie the tower crane in 3 positions, so that's the reasoning for this. So we can't have the core exceeding the height of the crane without tying it in. So that's the reason for parking it up. So in about 11 to 12 months time, that process will be complete.
My name's Ray Fleming. My job role on this project is supervisor, mainly dealing with rebar, all the rebar activities, from recruiting the guys to helping with the design, helping with the install and the logistics to help build this project. I've been involved in this industry for 44 years now, and been around the world and worked. Coming back to this project, the viaduct, been quite close and demanding to me since July 2020. I visited this project then, not far from where we stood. There was no construction work done at that point. It was mainly archaeologists was in here. There was 3 archaeologists, and I went up talking to them, and had quite a good chat. My visit that day was to work out some site logistics, how we can get the rebar in, how long it could be, what shape it could be, and that was the start of it. And this foundation, what you stood on now, there was over 600 tonnes of rebar in this, and where the core is, it's up to 3 metres deep. Massive amounts of rebar. Some of the biggest I've come across in me 40 something years. Once the foundations got built, we done a core which has a stairwell and 2 lift elevators in it, and we done 11 bifurcating columns. They're these massive columns which was complex to build, that started on the foundations and ending on the transfer slab. There was a massive amount of work in those. So once we got up to the transfer slab, which was a complex build, but nevertheless it was a success, we started on the core, and that's a slip form, and it goes up so many metres per day. So currently at the moment we're working on a slip form, vertical columns and some shear wall. Another phase of work going on at the same time is the swimming pool. So that's progressing, of which they've concreted the base of the swimming pool today. So there's various other phases, and pretty much in a few weeks' time, Viaduct 2 is going to start. At the moment, the piling rig is in there, and all the piles are getting put in for that.
Phase 2, yeah, so phase 2, archaeology work's complete, pile mats are in, so the pile mats that allows the pile rig to drive around safely, nice and level, and then we started piling. So but the difficulty with the piling on both phase 1 and phase 2 is because you're piling under the arches. There's only special and specific rigs that can fit under there, and it's a slower process than normal. So we have special rigs that, because of the restricted height, you can only use certain pieces of equipment to do the works.
So the Viadux is quite unique in the way that we've had to come out of the ground. Essentially, it's not an open site. It's already a site that's got a building on it, essentially, albeit the arches that used to go to the former train station adjacent, now the Manchester Central Convention Complex. So a traditional build would be just piling with normal piling rigs. You've got no overhead obstructions or anything like that. But in this case, obviously the overhead obstructions are already there, so piling is done in a different technique called sectional flight auger. So it's a lot more time consuming. You can only do about 3 piles a day from a rig. There has been some issues with the piling when we're doing a certain amount of piles, which is to support a podium deck which will bridge between the 2 towers. We found quite a significant concrete obstruction that went down about 5 or 6 metres below the ground. Works had to be suspended, and we had to find a way of getting rid of that obstruction. A specialist drilling rig was then brought in to bore through the obstruction and then return for piling again, so it was quite costly and time consuming to get over that issue.
Yes, all the archaeology work's complete, so phase 1 and phase 2 it's complete. So you have a written scheme of investigation, which is kind of a part of a planning document which you've got to satisfy before you can continue. So part of the Viadux scheme was that every element of every area under the arches need to be fully excavated. The archaeologists will go and do their archaeology works. They'll take the findings, log the findings, and then they'll hand the area back over to us to construct. So until that happens, we kind of sit there in abeyance, you know, until the archaeologists sign that off. So that's complete now. Phase 1 and phase 2, which is really good. And Graham's going to come this afternoon. Graham Motterson, he was the archaeologist. He's the man. He'll go into it in far more detail, because I know it's a really interesting subject, and I know a little bit of it. Graham knows a lot about it.
Yeah, I'm Graham Motterson. I'm the excavations manager from Salford Archaeology. So I'll just kind of got home, threw something on and ran out.
Don't worry. That's why I'm here.
No, I'm all right. Yeah, well, Viadux, I was approached initially by Domis. We do a lot of work for Domis. Now, obviously, any construction you're going to do in Britain has to get planning permission. So you put in various applications for different levels of planning permission, and that goes through various bodies. And they can, either your permission's granted or it's refused, but they can put conditions on it when it is granted. 99.9% of all archaeology in Britain is done through conditions on planning permission.
Well, all modern digs now, Byron, all modern sites, something as prestigious as this one, it's a law that you'd have to have archaeological digs, and that could delay the project a little bit. If they find something like remains, that could get a police investigation going.
Talking to Graham, the guys at the University of Salford for the archaeological dig and what we needed to do on Viadux 1 and 2, they were really, really interested in the fact that this was right on the edge of the Castlefield settlement, and they were really excited about the fact that they were going to be able to find a lot of more Roman artefacts and whatever else they could find there, plus sort of like the foundations and whatever else from the slum housing that was there beforehand. So this effectively is the last site in Manchester, or one of the last sites, and Graham will talk in a lot more knowledge about this than I will, but probably the last site in Manchester that close to that Castlefield settlement that they were going to excavate.
So they put in their planning permission, and that went through GMAAS, Greater Manchester Archaeological Advisory Service, who are they're the advisors to all the local authorities in Greater Manchester. So a planning condition was put on it that they had to initially have what you call a desk-based assessment and then an evaluation. So we'd done that first. What they're aimed to do is have a look at the potential of there being any archaeology on the site and whether that archaeology would be impacted by the development. So the desk-based assessment looks at the potential. That came up with the fact, right, you've got 3 main elements there. The first one is Viadux it's not quite Castlefield, it's just on the wrong side of Deansgate, but it's very close to Castlefield, it pretty much is. Castlefield is obviously called Castlefield because the Roman fort is there. Now quite a lot of that's been excavated, but what tended to happen when the Romans came and built a fort is there's full of squaddies, Roman squaddies basically. They've got lots of cash. Sorry, when I say a squaddy, a lot of Roman soldiers. The Roman soldiers relatively well paid. They've got money, and this happens. I mean, with military camps all over the world at all periods. Your civilians kind of go towards where the money is. So you get these little civilian settlements growing up around the forts, and we tend to call these a vicus. Is the civilian settlement that grows up around the Roman fort, and the vicus of Manchester grew up there and kind of expanded outwards over where Deansgate is now. So we knew that the Viadux site is on the edge of the Roman vicus. So we weren't looking at the fort, but we were looking at the civilian settlement associated with it. Now that's actually very important, because if you're actually looking at material culture, which is what we look at, looking at what was going on in history and how people were living, looking at a military fort is very interesting, but it doesn't tell you how the people were actually living, normal people. Whereas looking at the civilian settlement and what was going on around it, the different industries and everything, and houses in there and everything like that, that tells you a lot more about the normal people living there at that time. So we knew that it was potentially an important site. The one problem is it's got a massive Victorian railway viaduct stuck on top of it. So it was like, is there going to be any of this left? We knew there was going to be some stuff there, but we didn't realise exactly how much. So we looked at the desk-based assessment originally, and there was high potential for there to be some remains, But we thought, well, you know, you've got 2,000 years of the of everything afterwards, the Industrial Revolution, you've got the viaduct going on it. There's probably going to be a little bit of stuff, but not that much. So we went and did the evaluation, and pretty much every single evaluation trench had Roman archaeology in it. So that's when we thought, oh, right, okay, we've got something pretty serious here. You get that over in Castlefield, where the railway arches are in Castlefield, but you don't get it anywhere else in Manchester. So we didn't think it would be the case, but yeah, it turned out it was.
I was here for the second phase of the archaeological dig. The first phase was carried out during the enabling works. I believe they did find a body of a child. I wasn't present on site at that time, but subsequently they found pottery from about the 1st century, I think it was, Roman road, some ditches, and also evidence of a lot of activity from the Victorian period as well.
I'd say there were 3 particularly interesting things. One of them was we found a series of ditches, just like, you know, big ditches that had been cut. They wouldn't have been full of water or anything, they'd just have been ditches. But usually settlements at that time, you'd put ditches around the outside. They might have been for defensive purposes, they might have just been boundary markers. There's no point in getting into the technical why and wherefore of it, but this series of ditches were the furthest boundary point of the Viadux, and they were all at slightly different periods. You could see that the ditches there'd be one there, and then there'd be another one out here, and that one would be dug, then it would be filled in a bit later, and the Viadux had expanded. So the next ditch is further out, and what we saw was the first expansion, right out to the furthest expansion. All the ditches were V-shaped ditches, which are Roman military ditches. So it looked like, even though it's a civilian settlement, you've got the Roman military having something to do with putting these ditches around, defending it. Because when the Roman folk was first there, they would have been in hostile territory, effectively. And then we saw the ditches actually started to come in and contract, and those were shallower U-shaped ditches, which are civilian boundary ditches, and it also showed it getting smaller. And we're waiting for the dating evidence at the moment, but one of the things we've always thought is you've got the settlement expands up into around the 3rd century, and then it starts to contract, because there was a big thing, the Roman Empire started to go into decline in the 3rd century, and there was a bit less money. There was a thing called the 3rd century crisis. And we can actually see this in where these outer ditches are, it actually happening. So that was pretty good. Another really interesting thing was most of the Roman advances here are attributed to a guy called Gaius Agricola, who was the Roman governor of Britain from 77 AD. Now he came over, he conquered all of what is now Wales, Anglesey and the north of England, and then he went up into Scotland, and he was fighting up in Scotland, and he did all this. And so traditionally it's always thought that the Roman sort of power in the north of England started with him around 77, 78, 79 AD, the late 70s AD. And this has been in all the history books. However, a lot of people don't agree with it, because one of the main reasons it was attributed to him is because we're told by a Roman historian called Tacitus that Agricola did all these things. However, Tacitus was Agricola's favourite nephew, and he was being bankrolled by Agricola, and Agricola had a big political campaign in Rome. And so people have said for a long time, we think a lot of the advances up into the north and into Wales were a lot earlier than Agricola. And one thing we've been doing, we've been finding features, sort of pits, ditches and so on, with Roman material in that we can date to the 60s AD, which is anything from 10 to 17 years before Agricola was ever there. So we may well be going on to prove that, yeah, the conquest of the north of England by the Romans was actually, you know, potentially nearly 20 years earlier than we thought it was, which would change all of the history books in terms of Roman archaeology. So we found, obviously we found quite a lot of all sorts of different Roman pottery. of various different types, the kind of thing we'd expect, I suppose. And it was mould made, whereas most pottery was thrown on wheels and then sort of coloured or painted. This stuff was made in moulds. It kind of looks like bright red flower pots, but with decoration on it. And it's particularly interesting and particularly important because there was records kept, even though it was 2,000 years ago. They have really accurate records of the people that were making it. So it was, because it was mould made, each manufacturer had their own set of moulds. And some broken pieces of Samian which had graffiti scratched on them in Latin. And that was kind of like it was almost like little notes being passed between people. You might get a broken piece, because it's a broken piece of Samian, and the red sort of glaze on it is quite soft, so it's very easy to scratch into. And they'd use these broken bits to just scratch little messages to give each other. And it's not a common thing, it's quite a rare thing to find. But we found a few bits of that at VIADOCS. Slum houses. So these were it was very densely packed, like in the late Georgian, the early Victorian periods, with these very small, very badly made slum houses that were just brick walls, brick floors, and so on. No heating, no running water, no power, no sanitation, nothing like that. And one of the things we found in one of them was some of the bricks had been lifted up in the floor, a hole had been dug underneath it, and they'd buried some bones. The people were very, very, very poor and wouldn't have been able to afford a funeral. So sometimes if they have a very young child that just dies, whether it's, you know, malnutrition or whether it's illness or whatever, they basically just lift the brick floor up, dig a hole, shove them in that, put the bricks down and crack on.
One of the things that they found was the full skeletal remains of an infant, and that was tagged with a number, and also some Roman artifacts. Thankfully on this one, other than small minor delays, it was more interesting to see what was here before we came to build our building.
What was your favourite find and favourite artefact found at VIADOCS, or one that stood out, let's say?
I think the Samian with the graffiti scratched on it, that was probably my favourite, because that's it's kind of a more personal thing. It's not like just a bit of broken pottery that was thrown away. But yeah.
So it's kind of all missing pieces coming together.
Yeah, that's exactly it. I always describe Roman archaeology in Manchester. It's like trying to do a jigsaw, but you've only got 5 of the pieces. I think we started in about April, May, something like May 2020, and we finished about 2 months ago.
2022 started from summer 2022.
Yeah. So they were going on for 2 years. We weren't there the full time for 2 years. We had to do it in phases, because quite often we'll come in, clear one area, and then when that's clear, Domis will come in. They'll do all their construction phase. So we'll go while they do that. Once they've finished that bit, we'll come back and clear the next area for them. So yeah, but on and off it was 2 years. Obviously for the excavation, we start off, we'll come in with a machine, we'll strip all the overburden and the top off until we get down to the archaeological layers, and then we'll dig everything by hand after that. We'll have a group of people in, so they'll clean things up, dig what we call features, which are like pits, ditches, post holes, anything like that. We'll also record everything gets drawn to scale, quite accurate drawings. We'll do a lot of surveying with laser instruments, laser scanners, drones. We bring back all of this information, the data set, all of the finds that we've got, all the pottery, anything else, glasswork, anything like that we've found. All that goes back to the office, and we'll use all that to basically write initially what we call a site report, which is a very dry, technical report. And that's what Domis will use primarily to sign off their planning condition for the archaeology.
So before we put a spade in the ground, in essence, the archaeologists come along and they clear the area. So it's quite unique on the arches, where under the arch where they can do it bay by bay. So they dig a bay, and they dig down to about 1.5 to 2 meters. And they were finding mainly basements from slum houses. So these slum houses were built prior to the arches being built. So the arches were built 1850s. make it into a railway station. So prior to that, the area had slum housing for the mills. So a lot of these are terrace houses, and they'll find a lot of basements, which is really interesting, the old toilets. So the archaeologists will work their way through each bay, and they'll kind of dig down to up to 2 metres. And then whatever they find, they'll log, they find a lot of pottery, they find a lot of Roman roads, which are really interesting. And then they would then sign the area back to us. So kind of, you're in the hands of the archaeologists at this point. If they find something of high interest, you can't push them along. Although programs dictate things get done in a period of time, it's kind of when this gets signed off back to us, and it's something you can't say, I need it back tomorrow. It's their call. Ultimately, it's when they close it off and give you the area back that you can then start construction. Until that period of time, you can't start any construction.
Where are the artefacts kept now? Are they in the museum or are they back at office with you?
Currently, most of them are in our labs at the minute. Some of them are off with external specialists. We've got like what we call paleo-environmental samples. It's like basically bags and buckets of mud that we can send off to experts who look into ancient sort of ecology and stuff like that. So yeah, it's either in our lab or it's off with the experts, but it will eventually end up probably at Manchester Museum. On quite a lot of sites we design heritage information panels, which are like big notice boards type things that are all laminated and everything that can go up, describing the archaeology to people passing by, or if people in the reception lobby, something like that. And you can always get display cases and get a selection of the best finds and put them in the display cases with a little bit of blurb about what they are.
But we're also producing a monograph. That's a book effectively which details everything that was found on the Viadux site, gives you the history of the Viadux site, so going back to 69, 70 AD when the Roman settlement was sort of created, up to 400 AD when it went.
I think the findings, we're looking at maybe putting some findings on display in the reception area, or certainly in the part of the amenity. So we need to get those signed off and handed back to us via the archaeologists. I think more the houses really, it gives you a feel for what was there prior to the arches being built. Obviously there's the mills in Manchester. There's a lot of people needed to work in the mills, hence why they had all these small houses and these slum areas. And that's quite iconic. That's quite, when you see it, it's quite moving really. You can kind of get a feel for the streets. We got an overlay of the area from Graham Motterson from Salford Archaeology, and it's really interesting. The tiny streets that are in the area, and where Beetham Tower is now, that was an old church and an old graveyard. So yeah, it's interesting. So yeah, I think there's definitely a feel for that.
We've got a very good relationship with Domis. They tend to come to us for all the archaeology that they need doing in Greater Manchester at least. And further out. We've done work from outside Manchester as well. It's a very different job. Just everything about it really, working under the viaduct and again for Manchester, the type of archaeology we're finding, you don't find that kind of thing. It's part of the overall project. I think the whole thing is as Paul was saying earlier, it is going to be iconic. I'm just involved in the archaeology there, but I'm a Manchester lad anyway. I grew up in Longside, so seeing this kind of stuff happening in the city is very good. And Viadux is not the kind of thing we've really seen before. So I think it is going to end up as a real landmark.
Because these houses were there prior to the arches being there. They demolished the houses, built the arches, and the arches became the railway station. And then the arches, I think they were derelict from the 60s up till the GMX, as it was called then, was redeveloped. So they sat empty for years as well. So yeah, the area is really, it's been in need of restoration, and it's happening now.
This is it. This is our big moment, Gary. This is it. It's our ticket out of engineering.
So, Gary Robinson, Chartered Civil and Structural Engineer.
Patrick Clayton, Civil Structural Engineer for Renaissance. Yeah, so Renaissance, we're a civil structural engineering company. We've been going for coming up 10 years now. Worked on a lot of jobs in and around Manchester in particular. We're a Manchester-based company. Just got an office in the northern quarter of Manchester. And yeah, we've worked on lots of different schemes. We've started working with Domis probably about 5 years ago. And we've grown with those guys really, and we do a lot of work with Domis. Viaduct scheme, it's split into 2 phases. Phase 1 is a residential tower. They're both sat over quite a challenging site, which has got the railway viaducts over the site, which has been a real kind of driver to the structural solution and the work we've done. I think Viadux is different in that just the challenges that we've got with the site really, and where it is. You know, the site is basically fully occupied with the listed arches below, so it's kind of not a natural place to build a tall building and an office as well. So it's thrown up a lot of engineering challenges in terms of, you know, how we kind of integrate those arches into the scheme and bring those arches back to life, and also kind of keep the operations moving on the site, because the site's occupied by Manchester Central as well. They use the site, so you know, we've got to build this quite challenging building, quite a big building, over those guys basically as well. So yeah, lots and lots of challenges. Yeah.
The uniqueness about this is, if you do them in 2 phases, you've got phase 1, which is 40-storey tall building. Generally speaking, on a 40-storey tall building, you'd always have a basement, which would allow you to spread the load, get rid of a lot of the issues you've got in terms of supporting a building on just one level of foundation. So that was one real key attribute the job had, which was challenging to get over in terms of the piling and foundation design. You've then got to break through the arches with the 12 columns and the core, which support the second floor transfer structure, which Rob was talking about, which is up to sort of 2.65 metres thick. And you've got to do all that while you're keeping a service yard live for Manchester Central. So Manchester Central have events of up to 15,000 people, a Tory party conference, all those kind of things happen there. So mixing all those things up is just absolutely unique and bespoke to this project. Once you get above level 2, it becomes a little bit simpler, but you've still got to construct another 40 stories of concrete frame, put all the glass in it and fit it out. When you normally pick up a scheme in pre-construction, you can look around and you can go, right, I can go and look at that one in London, or I can go and look at that one 2 miles down the road, and I can sort of steal some ideas from there, and we can talk to the designers, the engineers, the architects, and we can come up with a bit of a plan, and we pretty much know how to do most buildings because it's been done before. With Viadux, it was more a case of sitting there and going, how do we build a 40-storey tower without a basement to spread the load, that's going through a live service yard, that's got massive settlement issues around the arches in terms of the foundations. So they cut, basically the foundations on the normal building can move up to 15-20 mil. So it was like every single challenge you can possibly think of, and you're going, can I just go down to London or can I go abroad and have a look at it? Nothing at all. So we're even sitting in the office one day thinking of, so we got these 12 column openings which Rob was talking about earlier on. How do we make them in a brick arch, which is, you know, 4 or 5 bricks thick, 1.5 metres of fill above it. It's got to be supported all the way through so the arches don't, you know, God forbid, collapse or anything like that. So we just sat there and we said, well, that hole is about the same size as that table. So what would we do if we were knocking through for that sort of hole? How much would that cost us? And we're doing stuff like that, looking at examples around the office of, you know, use a table as an example of how big the hole is. And then we just spent an awful lot of time with the engineers going through the safest method of demolishing the arches to actually create the interventions where the columns go through, where the core goes through, how we're going to do the site investigation so we can find out exactly what kind of strength we've got in the rock. So it was never ending. It was never ending. So it was the most challenging job I've been involved in. I've been working in the industry for the best part of 25 years.
I think that's it. I think it's the constraints of the site for the scale of the building. So a 40-storey tower on grade 2 listed arches next to a electricity northwest substation, next to Manchester Central, while the service yard remains in full operation. It's all of that. It's the site for the scale of the building that goes on it is the real challenge.
Yeah, normally you might get one of those constraints on the site, but here we got all of them. So,
like most jobs, you get hiccups and nitty-gritties, as we call them, but you've got to overcome them quite quick. We've had some issues with rebar design and stuff that we have to get over quite quickly.
One of the biggest challenges since I've been here has been the increased prices in everything, specifically steel, but positively the rumours are that steel prices are starting to stabilise now. So,
thankfully, with the way Domis operates with their company, Renaissance, the design team are on here, get a phone call away, they could be even on a site in less than an hour. So as for problems, we always have a solution quite quickly with it. So with a go forward team.
A number of them really. I think the biggest one is water ingress. You know, we're trying to build an amenity space under an open service yard above us, which, you know, you've got the arches and then you've got like 2 metres of filled land, and then you've got tarmac, which is a car park. You know, the difficulty is waterproofing that. So there's a process in place to do that, but it's like I say, it's slow and it's difficult, and we can't do it everywhere. So the actual build's going to provide most of the waterproofing when phase 1 and phase 2 are finished. When in between each of those there's a large landscape podium, which is what it says. It's a big terraced area which can have trees on there, can have barbecues. It's in addition to the amenity area for the residential, and that will provide a lot of cover to make the amenity space dry. That's a big challenge, you know, even to this day when we have a lot of rain, it still rains in.
Yeah, so obviously it's a strange build. We don't normally build a high-rise building on top of where we're working, and this was a car park above the brickwork, and we're getting water ingress as the building was going up, the concrete frame. They were breaking through the roof, and it was damaging the drains. So all the drains, when it was raining on the car park, all the water was ingressing onto the bricks, and that was a hell of a problem, because we were filling all the joints, and obviously it was getting water and it wasn't going off. The archaeologists to work around, we've had other trades, while Mayo's, the concrete frame lads, have been breaking through. A major problem that we've had is with dust. It's an enclosed area, so we've had to have ventilation when the lads have been working. They've all been working above themselves, and you can imagine raking all this out and the dust going in your eyes. Hard work.
For a 40-storey tower, we had to sit it on piles, so we had to sit it on stilts. Now normally you can create a basement, so the skyscrapers in London, you would create a basement to offset a lot of the load, but we couldn't do that here within the arches. So we had to pile without a basement, but then we had to pile close to the arches, but we couldn't damage those arches. We needed to understand how much settlement would occur. So we had to do a lot of site investigation to understand the ground, the nature of the rock, and develop that solution. And then it's a relatively deep piled raft. So the depth of that concrete, we had to go down 2.5 to 3 meters next to the brick arches. So again, we needed to understand whether any movement would occur or whether damage would occur to the arches, and control that with a lot of temporary works design. And then because the concrete was so deep, that 2.75, we had to control the temperature within that within the mix of the concrete, so that took a lot of work with the suppliers and the use of quite innovative materials. When concrete gets hot, when it reacts with water, that's how it makes its strength. Now if it gets too hot in the middle compared to the temperature of the air, it's that thermal gradient that can cause it to crack. If it causes it to crack, you don't get the same strength within the mix. Now the problem with a foundation is you can't really see where it cracks. So what we had to do is, and we worked with Domis and Mayo's to put actual temperature sensors within the concrete. And we designed the mix so we used a waste material from steel called GGBS, which means you get less heat developed. And we actually used quite an old school method of putting sand across the top of the foundations to mean that it was insulated, so you didn't get the temperature gradients through that. So we were confident that we wouldn't have any risk of the foundations cracking. So it was again, that's quite a common occurrence within hot climates, like in the UAE, they would do similar techniques, but within the UK, that's quite novel, really. So yeah.
Processes we thought we could use, we couldn't use. So it took 18 months of work before we even started on site. And that was predominantly because it's so unique. So the foundation's really deep. We put 6,000 tons of concrete in just the foundation. So it's 3.2 meters deep. The foundation sat on top of the piles.
What's normal? What was
normal? You'd have a meter maybe maximum, and you got these huge mega columns, and they're huge. Just because they've got to take 40 stories. We're doing all this work. We're obviously working on the Manchester Central Convention Centre's service yard, which needs to remain open at all times. So this is a challenge. So this is what was used as a Nightingale hospital. So when we first started on site, we were delayed slightly because the Nightingale was in place until May last year, May 2021. We were due to start doing the penetrations through in February 2021. So we had to push that back because of the Nightingale for obvious reasons. So we assisted clearing the Nightingale. We got rid of the oxygen tanks, the big foundations, and then we got the area not to ourselves because that has to remain open at all times. So that serves the convention centre. So that's probably the most difficult part of the scheme is the logistics. We can't just close the road off. We've got to so they have big events. They may have something like 200 Arctics in a day, and we can't restrict that in any shape or form. There's a huge penalty sacrifice if we do that. Phase one, we're at a point now where we're up and above them, so it's not as bad. We still have issues, but phase two is just starting. Phase two takes a huge chunk of their service yard. Just going through how we keep the service yard open and in essence keep the building open whilst we build phase one and phase two. That piece is still ongoing, phase two. And there's not much give and take really from them guys. They know what they need to run their business, and we've kind of got to work around them parameters. And there's been some difficult conversations between us and Manchester Central, and we have a good relationship, a good working relationship, and we think that we're kind of almost there now. But it's got its own. The scheme's very unique in many ways, really, and that's probably the biggest challenge. No, it's always a challenge. We were always building the tower, and the foundations were always starting under the arches, and it hadn't really been done before, so it's always going to be a challenge. There was as big a challenge as we thought. It's been probably a little bit more tougher than we thought at times. I think there isn't a template where you can say, as I mentioned, that you can't say it's been done. We can go and reference 7 or 8 schemes. It just hasn't been done to this scale. I think what this will do, this will unlock a lot of areas that people didn't think viable to build on as being viable. You would think that you could build apartment block through the arches. Nobody. Yeah, no, really excited. Yeah, well, excited. Yeah, it's been probably the wrong word. Really excited. I think we feel as though we've achieved something. We've kind of like ticked a huge box, which was very difficult to get to. You'll start to see the effort now going into the sky. Then we'll just repeat that process for phase 2. It's going to look amazing. When the scheme's finished, it's just going to be mind blowing. It's going to blow everyone away. That's an absolute fact.
Yeah, so we'll be finishing this phase of the build in the next 4 weeks. We've also been doing a few new build on the substation using bricks from Manchester. So we've been doing that. That's finished now. We've been doing the internal block walls. It's just normal block work. But the second phase of this is going to kick off in about October time, and we're looking forward to getting our teeth into that one.
There's loads of things going on. We're going to be doing glazing on Great Bridgewater Street, cleaning the historic brickwork, and I think more so the size of the tower. You can really get a feel for it now. So if people want to stand below it on Great Bridgewater Street, it's just enormous. You know, you get a real feel for the size of it. And you're going to start seeing it. You're going to start seeing it all over Manchester in the next couple of months.
Just seeing it kind of all come together. Obviously, that's kind of for me, that's the best part of our job. Is, you know, we're kind of we have these ideas and we're working with the architects and the client to create something, and then seeing it actually happens, you know, hugely rewarding. So, yeah, I'd like to test out the swimming pool, certainly. I think particularly using the arches, I think obviously that's one of the key features of the site. It kind of really grounds it in Manchester. You know, the arches are, you know, very typical of Manchester's kind of Victorian infrastructure, and to have a new building literally coming out of those arches, I think is really kind of unique to Manchester, and it tells the story of the city really well.
Well, the future of the building, it's quite a landmark building in terms of how it's been built. It's also very unique. In fact, it looks like all the other towers around here, but the ground floor is just completely different, and I think it's quite exceptional. Quite a desirable building it will be to be living in or working in, whether it's the commercial tower or the residential.
It's absolutely mega, this site. It's huge. All the sort of steel and temporary works that's going in on the slab. It's really amazing to be a part of it, to be honest. The amount of engineering that's gone into it.
So going forward, this is really an iconic job. Probably one of the most iconic in Manchester, in my opinion. And to get as far as we have, a lot of the team feel a sense of pride to have achieved what we've achieved, to get where we have.
So I'd like to think that, you know, the Viadux phase 1 and phase 2, and certainly the amenity, that's, you know, the amenity, I'd like it to be accepted as the best amenity in Manchester, if not in England, because it's going to be mind-blowing. You know, it's got to be like one of those places where people want to just have a walk in, to have a look at it.
Feeding a modern building through this through the historic arches, it brings it back to life, really. So to put the bars and the public space back in there, and for that land to be used in a new and modern way.
It's going to be a special scheme, definitely.